Imagine this. You're walking down a long, empty corridor. The lights above flicker, not from electricity, but memory. Each pulse of brightness reveals another door. Some hang wide open, their rooms filled with echoes, voices that once tore through you, moments that fractured your sense of self. Others are locked so tightly you've forgotten what you sealed inside. You keep walking, faster now, but the hallway stretches with you, reshaping like a dream that knows your secrets. You try not to look into the rooms, but your eyes betray you. There's the one where you were betrayed, another where you were humiliated, and further down, the one where you begged, not for love, not even for mercy, but simply to be seen. Each door bears your fingerprints. You didn't ask for this corridor, you didn't build it not knowingly, but you've lived in it longer than you care to admit. And worse, somewhere deep down, you've started calling it home. So here's the question that doesn't leave you alone. Are you living, or are you surviving the aftermath of living? You tell yourself you've moved on, that time heals all wounds, that you're stronger now. But strength isn't always a virtue when it calcifies around the pain like armor. What if you've just become very good at bleeding internally? You laugh at things that once shattered you. You downplay the weight you carry because you've learned that most people prefer smiles to scars. And so you cope with silence, with routine, with addictions so subtle they wear the mask of productivity. But underneath it all, there's a whisper, a voice not silenced, only muffled. It says, you were not meant to live like this, yet you do. We all do, in our own corridors of ghosts. Now think about this. The mind doesn't distinguish well between what happened and what we relive. The body still reacts. The nervous system still tenses. The breath still shortens. That same wound, opened long ago, bleeds a little every time it's remembered. You carry those wounds in your posture, your voice, your choices. You carry them into conversations, into intimacy, into how you see the world. You didn't choose the wound, but you choose each day what to do with it. And here lies the paradox. You are not your trauma, yet it shaped who you are. You are not your pain, but it's written into your emotional DNA. You want to be free, yet freedom feels unfamiliar, even unsafe. So which is it? Are your wounds a chapter in your story, or the entire book? Are they a caution sign or a compass? People say, let go. But how do you let go of something that forged the way you think, the way you feel, the way you love? Because here's the brutal truth. Sometimes the pain becomes so familiar, so interwoven with identity, that healing feels like annihilation. What would you even be without the ache, without the memory, without the armor, empty, lost, or finally real? This is not a story about denial. This isn't some hollow manifesto on positive thinking. Your wounds are real. No one gets to debate that, not even you. The betrayal, the abuse, the neglect, the loneliness, it all happened. The body remembers. The soul remembers. You didn't make it up. But here is the unbearable, beautiful possibility. Your wounds are real, but they don't own you. What if you could learn to touch your pain without becoming it? What if you could look your past in the eye and say, you happened, but you don't get to define me anymore? What would that cost you? What might it give you? And what are you still so afraid of losing if you finally became free? Because here's the secret we rarely say aloud. Sometimes we stay broken not because we can't heal, but because wholeness would force us to step into the unknown. And pain, for all its cruelty, is still something we know how to carry. But isn't it time to ask, what might life feel like when you're no longer carrying the wound as your name? The hallway is still there. The doors remain. But something is stirring in you, a realization, a rebellion, not against the past, but against its tyrannical control of your present. So you stop walking, you turn, and you ask finally, not with fear, but with fire, who am I when the wound no longer speaks for me? The silence that follows is not emptiness, it's space, space for something else to emerge. And now we begin the descent, not into despair, but into truth. Because to know the full weight of why the wound still haunts you, you must understand how it got its power in the first place. Pain, by itself, is a messenger. It's meant to warn you something is not right. But what happens when the warning never stops? When the message becomes your internal monologue? When the wound, though old, continues to speak louder than the present moment? This is where the hidden problem lies. You don't just suffer the pain, you inherit its logic. You may believe you've left the battlefield, but if the war is still raging inside your mind, then the terrain has only changed. Not the violence, and worse, not the authority. Carl Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." That's the tyranny we're dealing with. Your wound isn't just an injury, it's a map. And it's been quietly drawing your path behind the curtain of your awareness. You think you're choosing partners, jobs, identities, but you're often choosing familiarity. You're choosing what confirms the story your wound already believes. If the wound says, "I am not enough," you chase achievement until exhaustion. If it whispers, "People leave," you either cling or run first. If it screams, "I deserved it," you become both jailer and prisoner. You become the curator of your own cage. Why? Because the psyche doesn't always crave joy. It craves certainty, and the wound, no matter how damaging, is certain. You know how it feels. You know how to survive it. And so, paradoxically, you repeat it, not to suffer, but to understand it. Not to fall, but to find a pattern that explains why you fell in the first place. But repetition doesn't equal resolution. It just deepens the trench. Schopenhauer believed that suffering was the fundamental condition of life. He didn't say that to depress us, but to wake us up. To show us that trying to eliminate pain altogether is futile. But transforming how we relate to it is where our power begins. And here lies the truth society rarely tells you. It benefits from your wound. A culture obsessed with productivity has little interest in your healing. A marketplace thrives when your self-worth is shaky. A system that rewards silence doesn't want you reclaiming your voice, so you're taught to suppress, to conceal, to package your suffering in neat little narratives, to turn your trauma into a lesson before you've even had a chance to grieve it properly. The result? A society of walking masks, everyone performing okayness, while the real battle happens alone, in the dark, in the mind. Nietzsche once said, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." But what if your why was hijacked by the wound itself? What if every goal you've set was unconsciously rooted not in vision, but in compensation? The need to prove, the need to fix, the need to be chosen. Now consider the concept of identity. What is it made of? Memories, narratives, repetition. So what happens when your most intense memories are rooted in pain? When the story you've told yourself for decades is narrated by fear, guilt, or abandonment, you don't just carry a wound, You carry a worldview, one where love equals pain, where closeness means danger, where joy feels suspicious. And over time, that worldview hardens into identity. I'm just not the type to be vulnerable. I'm too damaged to be loved fully. I always mess things up. But none of those are facts. They are defensive philosophies, self-preserving myths designed to keep you from walking back into fire. And like all myths, they carry power even when they're false. Viktor Frankl, who survived Auschwitz, wrote that suffering ceases to be suffering the moment it finds meaning. But here's the nuance. Meaning is not the same as justification. You don't have to romanticize your pain to extract wisdom from it. You don't have to say, "I'm glad it happened," to say, "It no longer defines me." And you certainly don't need to keep carrying it in your spine, your chest, your choices. But to release it, you must confront what it's been feeding: control, certainty, self-protection. You see, every wound, especially the deep ones, creates a compensation pattern. If you felt powerless as a child, you may become hyper-independent. If you were neglected, you might perform endlessly for love. If you were shamed, you'll try to curate a life so flawless it becomes invisible. But here's the tragedy. These adaptations worked once, but now they imprison you. And they do so silently, elegantly, convincingly. You're praised for being so strong, so capable, so put together. But no one sees that your strength is a mask for exhaustion, your capability a byproduct of never being able to rely on anyone, your poise a polished form of trauma response. This is the hidden machinery beneath your suffering. The wound is real, yes, but its roots grow not in the moment of injury, but in what you had to become to survive it. So the question isn't just what hurt you, it's what has your pain turned you into? And more urgently, is that version still necessary or just familiar? Because once you name the architecture of the wound, once you see how it operates, not just in your memories but in your daily micro-decisions, you gain leverage. And with that leverage you can choose differently. But first, you must feel the weight of what happens when you don't. When the wound is left unexamined, when pain becomes personality, when silence becomes self. Because the cost of not facing this hidden problem isn't just emotional, it's existential. It shapes your relationships, your capacity for joy, your tolerance for peace. It becomes the invisible author of your life script. Now that you see it, you can't unsee it. The wound is no longer just pain, it is a system. But what happens when a system goes unchecked? You begin to answer to it like it's your God, and that's where we're headed next. Not into the pain itself, but into its unseen consequences. The hidden empire it builds behind the scenes, the choices it manipulates, the futures it sabotages, and what it costs to finally reclaim your authorship. The wound doesn't speak in screams, it whispers, and that's why it's so dangerous. You don't notice the whisper at first. You think it's just you, your instincts, your gut feeling, your logical conclusion. But what if that logic has been quietly rigged by an ancient fear you never challenged? What if your gut has been digesting trauma for years? You turn down opportunities but tell yourself you're just realistic. You isolate when things get too good, but convince yourself you just need space. You chase unavailable people but dress it up as deep chemistry. You procrastinate on your dreams, but call it perfectionism. That's the wound, writing your story in a disguised dialect. Because here's the brutal architecture of it. Your unhealed pain rewires your perception of reality. It decides what's safe. It decides what's familiar. It decides what's possible. Neuroscience confirms this. When the brain experiences trauma, especially prolonged emotional trauma, it wires for survival, not for flourishing. The amygdala, your brain's fear center, becomes hypersensitive. The prefrontal cortex, where logic and reason live, gets overridden by old alarms. Your nervous system doesn't know it's 2025. It still thinks you're 8 or 14 or 22, trapped in that moment you never got out of emotionally. So even when the danger is long gone, the body still scans the room like it might return. This leads to hypervigilance, overthinking, dissociation, not because you're broken, but because you adapted too well. You became a master of reading the emotional weather, of anticipating rejection before it arrives, of controlling every variable just to avoid chaos. But in doing so, you also became a stranger to ease. And here's where the unseen consequences take root. You mistake tension for truth. If a relationship doesn't trigger you, you assume it's boring. If an opportunity feels expansive, you wonder what's the catch. If someone treats you with unconditional kindness, you distrust them because your body doesn't recognize that kind of safety. And so the wound not only limits your freedom, it distorts your compass. You start navigating toward what feels familiar, even if it's harmful. This is how people stay in cycles they swear they hate. How they leave healthy love to chase emotional chaos. How they abandon peace because they mistake it for emptiness. They're not crazy, they're conditioned. Conditioned by a system that was once necessary, but is now outdated. Conditioned by the brain's tendency to favor predictable suffering over unfamiliar joy. And here's the irony. You might even become successful in a life that is quietly suffocating you. You might earn the job, the accolades, the followers, only to realize none of it penetrates the hollow chamber inside. Because the wound still decides what counts as love, what counts as worth, what counts as real. Aldous Huxley once observed, "Most human beings have an almost infinite capacity for taking things for granted. And perhaps the greatest thing we take for granted is the cost of what we normalize. We normalize emotional numbing. We normalize chronic stress. We normalize self-abandonment. And the most dangerous normalization of all, we begin to think we are our pain. It becomes our aesthetic, our brand, our conversation starter. And while it's important to be open about suffering, there is a thin, almost imperceptible line between expressing your wound and becoming it. That's the cost we rarely count. The unhealed wound becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. It tells you you're unworthy, so you push people away. Then you feel abandoned, which confirms your unworthiness, so you retreat deeper. Repeat the cycle. Call it destiny. But destiny is just repetition, dignified by time. And here's something even darker. When pain becomes your baseline, you unconsciously sabotage anything that threatens to replace it. You'll pick fights in calm relationships. You'll downplay your achievements. You'll find reasons why you can't possibly be happy. At least not yet. Not until you're thinner, richer, more healed, less broken. You postpone your life until the wound is fixed. But wounds aren't problems to be fixed. They're realities to be faced. And if you don't face them, truly face them, they metastasize into resentment, into depression, into a gnawing existential ache that no productivity hack can solve. Jean-Paul Sartre argued that we are condemned to be free. that the burden of shaping our lives lies squarely on us, and most people flee from that responsibility. Why? Because it's terrifying to realize that freedom includes the power to stop identifying with your suffering, to say, I am not my past, I am not my patterns, I am not my protection mechanisms. But to say that, you must first see what you've become in service of your wound. So ask yourself, what have I lost while trying to keep myself safe? Who have I never become because I was too busy surviving? What dreams have I delayed until my pain gives me permission? The consequences are not just internal, they ripple outward. You teach your children what love looks like, not by what you say, but by what you tolerate. You build workplaces where exhaustion is the currency of worth. You vote for systems that reflect your internal powerlessness. The world mirrors the psychology of the wounded, and yet, all of this can change. But only if you dare to see the wound not as your enemy, but as your origin, not your identity, not your destiny, just your starting point. But to move forward, something radical must occur. You must stop asking, why did this happen to me? And start asking, what will I do with it now? The wound shaped your survival. Now it's time to shape your freedom. But this won't be a gentle shift. It will feel like betrayal. You'll feel like you're betraying the younger version of you who built the fortress, like you're abandoning the parts that protected you when no one else did. And in a way, you are, but not out of cruelty, out of respect, because the next chapter of your life requires a different author, and that's where we go next. Into rebellion, into the radical act of reclaiming your story. Rebellion doesn't always look like fire. Sometimes it looks like silence, the kind that holds its ground instead of apologizing for existing. Sometimes it looks like joy, the audacious kind that blossoms despite the trauma's prediction that you never would. And sometimes rebellion is as subtle and as seismic as telling your pain, you don't get to run the show anymore. Let's be clear, this isn't self-help fluff. This isn't about letting go or staying positive. Those are just anesthetics dressed up as wisdom. This is a revolt against the emotional hierarchy you've allowed your pain to build, against the mental architecture that says your suffering makes you small, against the story that says this is just who I am, because it's not. That's a myth, a seductive one, but a myth nonetheless. To break free, you have to commit an act of psychological treason. You must betray the system that has been keeping you safe. You must walk away from the version of you that earned survival by shrinking. Let that land. You don't need to kill your past self. That part of you deserves compassion. It deserves a funeral, not a trial. But you do need to stop letting that self write your script. So how? How do you rebel against a force that lives in your own nervous system? First, you stop confusing vigilance with virtue. Hyper-independence is not a personality trait. It's a survival strategy. People-pleasing isn't kindness. It's camouflaged fear. Control is not strength. It's grief, trying to rewrite history. These aren't your quirks. They're protective costumes. Take them off. You don't need to be on all the time. You don't need to anticipate every emotional landmine in the room. You don't need to be everything for everyone. You just need to be real. And that starts with acknowledging your war mask and laying it down. Second, you start practicing emotional fluency, not emotional suppression. You were likely taught to hide it, swallow it, rationalize it. But rebellion looks like sitting in the raw heat of your feelings in choosing not to run, not to fix, not to justify, just to feel. Because unprocessed emotions don't disappear. They bury themselves in the body, in your fatigue, your headaches, your anxiety, your restlessness. Emotions are not the enemy. Avoiding them is. So feel the rage, the sorrow, the terror. Let them have their ceremony. You've been holding them hostage long enough. Third, reframe your inner voice. You've been speaking to yourself in the voice of your wound for years. That voice is critical, calculating, always a second away from self-condemnation. Time to change the narrator. Talk to yourself like someone who has suffered and survived, not like someone who failed. This doesn't mean delusion, it means dignity. You don't lie to yourself. You tell the truth, but you do it in the language of compassion, not cruelty. There's power in saying, yes, I was broken, but I kept breathing, and that counts for something. Fourth, build an inner life so strong, the world can't uproot it. You've outsourced your worth long enough. To achievements, to relationships, to how many people clap when you speak. But rebellion means going inward, creating rituals of reflection, practicing solitude, getting quiet enough to hear the voice beneath the wound. Journal not to document your day, but to uncover your unconscious loyalties. Meditate not to feel zen, but to confront the chaos without running. Read philosophy not to impress, but to find new metaphors for your suffering. Nietzsche said, "He who climbs upon the highest mountains laughs at all tragedies, real or imaginary." That's not about apathy, that's about perspective. You can't outthink your trauma, but you can outgrow it. You can become larger than the system that shaped you. Fifth, give up the idea that healing will feel like healing. It won't. It will feel like betrayal, like loss, like walking naked into the unknown. Because healing isn't about returning to who you were. It's about becoming someone you've never met before. Someone you would have never had the chance to meet if the pain hadn't demanded a transformation. That's the alchemy. The wound doesn't disappear, but it gets rewritten, recoded, reclaimed. You don't forget what happened. You learn how to carry it without letting it carry you. You become the author, not the echo. And finally, surround yourself with people who speak truth, not comfort. Find those who won't just nod when you explain your pain, but challenge you to not make a home in it. Build relationships where honesty is the currency, not performance. You don't need more cheerleaders. You need mirrors. Mirrors that reflect your potential back to you, even when you've forgotten it exists. You see, rebellion isn't a single act. It's a posture, a daily declaration. I am not here to live small. I am not here to repeat inherited pain. I am not here to be mastered by memories. Rebellion is choosing presence over protection, vulnerability over armor, intention over reaction, and perhaps most importantly, rebellion is allowing yourself to receive peace, not just chase it, to let in the love that your wound once rejected, to feel the softness you once feared, to breathe without waiting for the next blow. Because here's the truth most never tell you. You don't have to earn your freedom. You just have to stop arguing with it. And when you do, when you finally accept that the wound was real but not rightful, formative but not final, you become something radical, not just healed, but whole. Now everything changes, but not in the way you expect. Not with fireworks, with silence, with stillness, with the revolutionary act of waking up one morning and realizing you're no longer ruled by what broke you. But if that's true, if your wounds no longer own you, then what does? That's the final question. And it takes us to the last chapter. Not just survival, not just rebellion, but the ultimate truth. Let's imagine something impossible. You wake up one morning and it's quiet. Not the quiet of a still room, but the quiet of your mind, free from the low, humming static of old fears. No guilt hanging on your shoulders like wet clothes. No voice in your head reciting your failures like scripture. No aching need to prove your worth to a world that barely knows your name. Just breathe, just presence, just you. And something inside you whispers, not in desperation but in revelation, I'm still here. That's the ultimate truth. Not that the wound didn't happen, not that it didn't matter, but that you remained. The scar is not the shame, it's the signature, proof not of pain but of passage. You've walked through the fire. What's left is not ashes, it's essence. But here's what no one prepares you for. Freedom doesn't feel like flying, it feels like mourning, because when you finally step outside the architecture of your old identity, you'll look back and realize you built an entire life around a self that no longer exists. The friends you kept to avoid being alone, the jobs you chose to feel important, the goals you set just to feel in control. You'll grieve them, you must, because healing is not just gaining something new, it's letting go of who you had to be. And that's not a loss, that's a right. You don't heal to return to who you were. You heal to become who you never had the safety to imagine. Think of it like this. You were never broken. You were buried under the debris of other people's projections, under the expectations of a survival system that had no room for softness, under the voices that taught you to distrust your own. And now the excavation is complete. What you uncover isn't a fixed version of you, but a free one. A self untethered from the old scripts, a self no longer in debt to the past, a self not defined by the wound, but defined by what rose in spite of it. And here's the paradox, the wound still remains. It's part of your story, but no longer the narrator. It's the soil, not the shape, the backdrop, not the blueprint, the shadow, not the soul. Because the ultimate truth isn't that you have to erase your past. It's that you can include it without obeying it. That you can walk with your scars, not as warnings, but as wisdom. Carl Jung once said, I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become. But the power of that truth lies in what it requires. It requires choice. It requires presence. It requires you to stop waiting for permission. From the world, from your parents, from your old pain, and give it to yourself, right here. Now, that's the holy moment, the sacred rebellion, when you stop asking, will I ever be whole, and start declaring, I already am. And if you're whole, then your life, this one flawed, beautiful, unfinished life, is not a cleanup project. It's a canvas. So what will you paint? Who do you become when you no longer need to be fixed? What do you build when you're no longer building from fear? How do you love when you're no longer loving from wounds? These aren't abstract questions. They're invitations, not to transcend your humanity, but to embody it fully, to fall in love with being alive, with being awake, with being you. And in doing so, something quiet but seismic happens. The world around you begins to shift. You stop enabling people who don't respect your light. You stop participating in systems that reward your numbness. You stop tolerating anything that treats your soul like a liability. Because now you see the lie, that your pain had to own you. It didn't. It never did. And now you're dangerous in the most sacred way. because you carry a past that didn't kill you, a truth that doesn't flinch, and a love for life that no system can steal. You're no longer the survivor, you're the alchemist. You took what was meant to break you and turned it into becoming. You became honest, awake, alive, and in this final moment, this breathless clarity, here's what remains. You were never too broken to heal. You were never too late to begin. And you were never meant to live beneath your story. You were meant to rise above it, to wear it like a crown, not a cage, to live not in spite of your wounds, but with the grace of one who has transformed them. And now there's nothing left to fear, because once you've owned your shadow, no one else can weaponize it. You've faced the mirror, and finally, you see the truth. The wound is real, but it never owned you. You just forgot you had the keys all along. Now it's time to walk free, not away from your past, but toward your life.